The Seven Wonders of Sassafras Springs. Chapter 3. Day 2. Jeb joins in. Did you bring us one of those big statues for the yard? Aunt Pretty asked at dinner that night. I had no idea what she was talking about. She means a wonder, son, said Pa. I wasn't ready to share that crazy doll story, not yet. I knew Aunt Pretty would want to know all about the curtains and fancy doodads at the Pritchards, but I hadn't noticed a thing but the doll. I'm going to wait and see what I've got at the end of the week, I told them. Oh, and just you know I hate to wait, Aunt Pretty fussed. Pa changed the subject. Mighty fine eats. Eben may sail the seven seas, but he'll never find as fine a cook as you, Pretty. I looked down at the plate of ham, boiled beans, and fluffy biscuits. I knew a peach pie was waiting on the windowsill. Yes, sir, I agreed. For an instant I felt a pang, picturing myself in Tokyo or Timbuktu, craving one of my aunt's peach pies. Aunt Pretty said, "Oh, go on now," and plopped a big heap of beans on my plate. "Have some seconds." I didn't want to disappoint her. No, sir, so I had my second helping and put Timbuktu clean out of my mind. When you're weeding corn up one row and down the next, you have a lot of time to think. So all Thursday morning I thought of that faraway mountain in Silver Peak, Colorado. The more weeds I dug up, the higher that mountain got. With one with one wonder under my belt, I was itching to go in search of more. But Paul was working extra hard, and I didn't have the heart task to take off. Around 3:30, Paul stopped abruptly. "That's enough, Eben," he said. "I won't be needing you till milking time." I didn't waste a second. I splashed the dust off my face at the pump and took a nice long drink. I checked that my paper and pencil were in my back pocket and headed for Yellow Dog Road with Sal tagging along. When I reached the edge of the Austins' farm, Jeb came racing toward me, kicking up a cloud of dust. "Wait up! I'm coming with you!" I looked around. "Where's the rest of the brood?" "Maggie said she'd watch them, but I've got to dry the dishes tonight in her place." Jeb didn't want to waste time talking about chores. "Any luck with those wonders?" I thought his big brown eyes would pop right out of his face when I told him about Miss Pritchard. "A doll? What kind of wonder is that?" "A doll that saved somebody's life," I told him. "I think that's a wonder, even if it's a peculiar one. You got any better ideas?" Jeb shook his head. "Nah, I've never seen anything special, except that three-legged cow my grandpa used to have." "That wasn't man-made," I told him. "Nope, it was a freak of nature." That's what Grandpa said. Jeb stopped to pick up a hedge apple and pitch it across the road. "I'm going all along the ridge first," I told him about Orville Payne. "Hooey," said Jeb. "You're lucky he didn't aim his shotgun at you. He'd just as soon shoot you as look at you." I hadn't thought about firearms before. "At least I got something." "A doll story." Jeb reached down for another hedge apple. This time he pulled his arm way back and sent it arching high into the air. "Hey, if you're looking for something special, we should go down to the Sailor House. A rich person is more likely to have a wonder than a poor one, maybe two or three." The Sailor place, right in town, was the only house in Sassafras Springs that had cur- curlicues and fancy trim, and a fine porch that curved all around the side, not to mention a big sleeping porch upstairs. The Sailors had money, something in short supply everywhere else in town. They owned the feed store, which also dealt in farm equipment. Farmers could do without new clothes, indoor plumbing, and even full bellies, but they couldn't do without farm equipment. That's why the Sailors had the biggest house in Sassafras Springs, and a Ford motor car in the driveway to boot. Some farmers, like Pa, had old pickup trucks, but the Sailors were the only folks who had a car just for riding around in. "I don't know about this," I told Jeb as we gingerly walked up the front steps. There was a window in the door with colored glass in it, put together to look like a rose. "Miss Sailor might not cotton to boys like us calling on her." Before I had time to think myself out of knocking, the door swung open and there was Miss Sailor, dressed in all pink with a big smile on her face. "Hello, young men. I thought I heard footsteps." "Howdy, ma'am," I mumbled. Miss Sailor was young, much younger than Mr. Sailor, and her soft brown hair was piled high on her head. "What can I do for you?" Jeb just stared at her like the cat got his tongue, but I managed to blurt out something about looking for wonders. "Maybe you better come in," she said. The inside of the house was so full of furniture and pictures, rugs, and lacy things that it looked like a store. It wasn't a place for the likes of Jeb and me. I'm not sure I have what you're looking for, Miss Sailor furrowed her brow, but I'll have a think. She had us sit on a sofa decorated with roses. I guess they were her favorite flowers. You wait here, and I'll be right back. Jeb had yet to say a word. He just sat and stared. After a while, I heard the rustling of her skirts, and Miss Sailor came back carrying a red satin box. I suppose this is our best bet, she said, sitting in a fuzzy blue chair across from us. She carefully opened it and pulled out a long strand of pinkish-colored pearls. These pearls belong to Mr. Sailor's great-grandmother. Aren't they lovely? She waited for some kind of reaction, so I said, Yes, ma'am, while Jed just nodded. She reached in again and pulled out a circle of small green beads. And this is a genuine jade from China, boys. Isn't that a wonder? I leaned in to look at the jade and mumbled something about it being nice, though the green glass beads Aunt Pretty wore at the county fair last year looked just as pretty and sparkled a whole lot more. Next, Miss Sailor pulled out a brooch with the outline of a lady in it, all carved in white. And this is my great-grandmother's hand-carved cameo. Jeb and I made admiring noises. Who did the carving? I asked. Oh, a jewelry maker in Paris, she said in a tone that let me know that French makers were a lot better than the ones in Missouri. Do you think these are wonders? She asked, biting her lip. Miss Sailor surely aimed to please. Yes, ma'am, I told her. The very finest. Miss Sailor looked relieved. She picked up another box, a cardboard box in the shape of a heart, off the table next to her. Have a chocolate, boys, all the way from St. Louis. She lifted the lid, uncovering rows of chocolates, round, square, and heart-shaped ones. The round ones are cream-filled. The square ones are solid chocolate, and the heart-shaped ones will have nuts, she explained. It only took a few seconds for my hand to land on a square chocolate while Jeb picked out a cream-filled one. We didn't know what to do next until Miss Sailor said, I believe I'll have a heart-shaped one. She popped the chocolate in her mouth. Go ahead, boys, she urged us. So we ate ours, chewing in silence, and oh, I'd never tasted chocolate like that before. There was nothing left to do but thank Miss Sailor, say our farewells, and get out. As we hurried down the steps, Miss Sailor arrived home, wearing a three-piece suit and a big city hat. What'd those rascals want? I heard him ask his wife at the door. Oh, they were just looking for something, she said. I gave them chocolates. You're too soft-hearted, Lily, he said, but that's what makes you so special. Did you see those pearls? They must have been worth a fortune. And those stones from China, too? Jeb exclaimed once we were down the road a piece. They were fine, but they were no wonders, I told him. Jeb looked like I just told him the sky was red instead of blue. Why, nothing in Sassafras Springs is worth what that jewelry's worth, he said. I know, but those three things together aren't worth one doll like Miss Pritchard's. All you can do with a string of pearls is hang them around your neck. I think I need to go back where I left off yesterday. If you're going back up the ridge, the next stop after the Pritchards is Coley's Point. If you go there, you'll be plenty sorry. Why? 'Cause that Coley is crazy. Everybody knows it, said Jeb. You go over there, and you won't live to see your mountain. Coley Pone was a bit odd, I agreed, but he was harmless, according to Paul. Jeb did not agree. Has he got a gun? I wondered. Who knows? He's got wild eyes, and he holds up his trousers with a rope. What Jeb said was true. I could skip Coley's place, but I'd kick myself hard if I ended up missing a wonder. If that's the next place on the ridge, then I'm going there. Come with me. There's safety in numbers, I told Jeb. Jeb stopped in the road and turned to me. I'll walk up there with you, he said, but I'm not going in that house. Agreed. Deal, I agreed. Who's that? Cully shouted as we approached his shack. Jeb and Sal both hung back when he lurched toward us, axe in hand. His eyes lit up as he raised the axe above his shoulder. I closed my eyes so as to not watch my own head being chopped off. When nothing happened, I opened them, just as Cully rested the axe back on his shoulder and showed off his 4 teeth in a wide grin. Boys, is it? Thought you was the tax collector. Haven't had a caller in a dog's age. Happy to have you, he said in a loud voice. Cully tended to shout. Don't know why more folks don't stop by. Cully Pone was a string bean of a man, That bit of a rope couldn't keep his trousers from drooping dangerously low, and the moths had quite a meal out of his felt hat. My mouth was dry as a bone, but I managed to explain what I was looking for. To my surprise, he didn't hesitate a tick when I told him what I wanted. Yes, indeedy, I got a wonder, he said as if somebody asked him for one every day. Yes, sirree. He left his axe on the stump he'd been hacking away at and motioned for us to follow him into the house. I had never been inside, and neither had anybody else I knew. I wasn't anxious to go in now, because Cully's place, no more than a shack, leaned considerably to the right. Cully made his living by doing handyman work. The trouble was, not many people wanted to hire a handyman whose own house was about to cave in. He might not have noticed, but everyone else in Sassafras Springs did. I'll give it a year, I heard Pa tell Aunt Pretty once. I quickly tried to remember if a year or more had passed since I'd heard him say it. On the other hand, a wonder is a wonder, and one more wonder would take me one more step closer to that mountain, so I followed him. When I glanced back at Jeb, he rolled his eyes as if to say, "When hell freezes over." I figured if I was going to the Nile or to the Amazon, I'd have to take a few chances. Against my better judgment, I forced myself to step inside. Shao trotted along behind me, and Cully didn't object. Near the door sat a huge chair covered with a pile of tattered quilts. There was an old pot-bellied stove in the corner and a bunch of wooden crates that Cully used for furniture. What caught my eye was a bookcase set dead in the middle of the room. It reached all the way to the ceiling, or should I say, the ceiling sagged down and rested on the top of the bookcase. The wood was split and warped, and the shelves leaned at crazy angles. Every inch was covered with useless items: bent fishing poles, dusty pop bottles, what might have been an ancient coconut, and a rusty mousetrap with a piece of cheese so old and dry even the hungriest rat would pass it by. Cully walked up to the bookcase and patted it, proud like. "Yep, here's a guaranteed wonder of the county, even the state, and maybe even a wonder of the whole doggone world." "You talking about the bookcase?" "Yes, sirree, it's a bookcase," Cully bellowed. "My prized possession. Had it since I was a boy. Never read me a book, but by jiggers, yeah, I have a bookcase. The doggonest bookcase you ever did hear of, too." Cully dropped to a chair and patted a crate for me to sit on. I didn't have time to worry about whether the roof would fall in or whether the crate would give way. Cully Pony was starting his story. Cully Pony's story. The Rainmaker's Revenge. This here bookcase once held the secrets of the universe, and it saved a couple of lives to boot. You probably never heard of Henry Upton, but folks up in Garterville did. That's in Garner County on the Garner River, about 50 miles north of here. Say they like the name Garter there, don't they? They had themselves a grand old drought when I was a boy. One year was dry. The second year was drier. The third year there wasn't even enough rain to wet a postage stamp. The famous Garner County corn was as shriveled as that dead old tree stump out front, and the river had no more water in it than you could squeeze out of a rock. Things looked bad for the farmers, I'll tell you that. Around that time, a fellow called Henry Upton moved to town, and nobody'd seen the likes of him before. He wore a genuine top hat like honest Abe Lincoln. He was president once, you know. Some said Upton was a professor. Some said he was a traveling magician. Some said he was the son of one of the richest families back east. He moved into a cabin up on Rooster Ridge, the highest point in Gardner County. Brought along a wagon load of fancy furniture, crystal lamps, horsehair sofas, and such. And he brought here this here bookcase. Might have looked fancier then, but it's the same one. The shelves were crammed with books, and the spaces where there weren't any books were filled with jars and bottles of smelly crystals and cloudy liquids. He didn't work the land, he just read all day long. Uppity Upton, they called him from the start. Yes, sirree. One day this Uppity Upton took himself down to the Garnerville Town Hall and walked right into the town board meeting like he was invited, which he was not. He stood there with a big smile on his face and made the board an offer. He promised to make it rain on Gardner County. If he did, they'd have to pay him $500 an inch. He guaranteed them 10 inches for $5,000. Those board members thought he was funny in the head. Even the mayor broke down and laughed. "What are you going to do, Uppity? A rain dance?" Henry Upton had long, gangly arms and legs and a round middle, so the idea of him dancing had the whole town board laughing. Uppity stayed calm and waited until they quieted down, and then he said he was going to use scientific methods. That made the board members hoot and holler to beat the band. Uppity raised his arms to quiet them down. "You only pay me if I get results," he told them. "You can't lose on the deal." Whoa, Nellie, that got them to thinking. Some of them were ready to sign him right up. The mayor argued that even if it did rain, there was no way Upton could prove it was because of him and not the Lord God Almighty. Uppity got real uppity and said, "Apparently the Lord God Almighty has not seen fit to make it rain around here so far. How much longer are you willing to wait?" Yeehaw! That got the Gardnerville Town Board folks thinking. Some said they couldn't afford to let their corn crops wither away. Others said that it was wrong to fool with nature. Some said Upton was a crackpot, and said it right to his face. The place was in an uproar, and Upton's face grew purple. "Does this mean you're turning down my deal?" he asked. The mayor stood up and looked at Upton eyeball to eyeball. "Your dad burned right, we're turning you and your harebrained scheme down." And with that Upton left, mad enough to burst his fancy gold buttons. The next morning he built a platform on Rooster Ridge. He built a brick fireplace with a huge chimney pointing straight up the cloudless sky, and over the platform he built a roof to protect the fire from rain, which there was none, of course. It was like a house without walls. Next, he built a fire and started pouring strange, smelly powders onto the flames. Smoke, the colors of the rainbow, rose up out of that fire and kept on rising all the way up to the sky. Yes, indeed, he rose halfway to heaven. The folks around Garnerville were watching every move he made. They saw him take a cot out on his platform and some blankets, and by Josephat, he slept there all night, getting up to add his secret potion every few hours. That fire never went out, morning to night, night to morning. Exactly 48 hours after the fires began, the clouds rolled in over Gardner County. Those clouds opened up and poured down rain. It didn't rain cats and dogs, it rained cows and horses, lions and tigers. Boy, it rained elephants and giraffes. The Gardner River began to rise. The seed corn began to sprout. They were celebrating in the kitchen of every farmhouse for 50 miles. Uppity gave the town board a bill for the first 5 inches. And did they pay Uppity? Oh, they talked about it. While the rain gushed down, they chatted. While the Brownstown Bridge washed out, they discussed. While the sprouted seed corn washed away, they argued. While two farmhouses slid into the Gardner River, they debated. Meanwhile, Henry Upton kept that fire a burning night and day, and the rain kept pouring down. Finally, one day he stopped long enough to trot down to the board meeting, which had been going on for a better part of a week, and demanded his payment in full. The mayor said, "We never make a deal with you, Upton. Maybe it was going to rain anyway, without your hocus pocus. We're not paying you a penny." This time old Uppity didn't argue. He went back to Rooster Ridge and piled on more logs and added more concoctions to that old fire. Purple and blue smoke billowed up from the chimney all day and all evening. When the lightning bolts lit up the sky, people could see Uppity tending that fire like a mother tending her newborn babe. 5 more inches drenched the town that night, 5 more inches the next day, 5 more by the morning after that. That night the dam broke and the mayor's house was flooded up to the third floor. He and his family floated their way to the town hall in their bathtub. Half the town board was already there, yowling like a bunch of soggy cats. For once, everybody agreed on one thing. They had to get Uppity to stop his rainmaking. They floated their way to high ground, then slid their way through the mud up to the ridge. "Stop right there, Upton!" the mayor shouted when they got to Uppity's place. "Have you no mercy?" Uppity smiled at the mayor. "Nice as you please. I'm glad to see you admit that this weather is due to my rain-making abilities," he told the mayor. "I take it you've brought my payment of $5,000 along?" Well, sir, this time the mayor's face turned purple. "I'm not paying you a penny, Upton. Now stop what you're doing or we'll have to stop you." "I'll stop," Uppity told them. The mayor and the board members and the sheriff all looked relieved until Upton added, "Pay me $10,000 and I'll stop right now." Uppity held a jar of crystals over the fire, ready to pour some more on. There was dead silence until, boom! A huge thunderbolt clattered overhead, and the whole kit and caboodle made a beeline out of there. Uppity kept on mixing and pouring, not stopping to eat or sleep. He was an angry man, ready to get his revenge on Garner County, but he wasn't the only angry man. Down the hill, the mayor gathered together the sheriff and the board and the farmers whose houses had washed away. They all slogged back up to the ridge, mad as wet hens, or maybe drenched roosters. Hee-haw! They carried pitchforks and shovels and any mean-looking thing they could find, and they made a circle around Uppity and his fireplace. "What's the meaning of this?" Uppity asked. "You've got 5 minutes to pack up and get out of here. We want you across that county line tonight," the mayor growled at him. Uppity argued until the mayor pointed the sharp prongs of his pitchfork at him. "Here's your payment, Upton, if you don't get now." Well, Upton prepared to get. The sheriff's deputies had already dropped the bookcase on the wagon, along with a truck full of clothes. The fancy furniture and crystal lamps got left behind. Uppity hopped onto the wagon, gave the reins a slap, and galloped toward the Garner County line. Halfway across the Garner River, the bridge collapsed, sending Uppity and his wagon and his horse straight down into the churning waters. The wagon sank like a brick, and the horse was swept away. The bookcase landed upside down, and all the books and powders and what-not were lost. But that old bookcase floated, and Uppity hung on for dear life as the water carried him downstream. He was moving so fast he never noticed when he passed the county line. After a while, the rain stopped. Next morning, as things started to dry up, the sheriff saw those books and bottles floating in the river and figured Upton was floating there too. His body was never found, leastwise not by anybody in Garner County. I found his body, but it was a living, breathing body. I was just a boy doing some fishing down where the Garner meets Liberty Creek River. I'd never seen the river swelled up so, and I was young enough to think all the rain would bring the fish right to the surface. My eyes bugged out of my head when I saw the floating bookcase. As it reached that fork where the rivers meet, the bookcase got caught up on some rocks. Henry Upton sat up, rubbed his eyes. Somewhere in the night, he flipped the bookcase over and floated the rest of the way, lying inside, dozing, safe as a chick in its nest. He was a muddy chick, though, mighty bedraggled. "Help pull me over, boy, quick!" Uppity yelled at me. I threw him a big stick, which he used to pull the bookcase closer. He jumped out and waded to shore, dragging the bookcase behind him. When I asked him what happened, he said he'd tell me the whole story if I'd find him dry clothes and a hot meal and get him to the nearest train station. Seems Uppity was smart enough to sew his money into his coat. And he had plenty of it, too, 'cause he'd earned money all over the USA, making rain for folks in trouble. Folks who paid him plenty, unlike the folks in Gardner. Ma cooked him dinner and Pa gave him some clothes. The man said his rainmaking days were over and he was going to some island where it never rains a drop. He left the bookcase with us, and Pa took him to the train station, and that was the last I ever heard of one Henry Upton. Hee-haw! How's that for a wonder, boy? I couldn't tell if the story was over, because Cully kept on chuckling and slapping his knee. When I thought he was finished, I asked him, "Did Upton tell you how he did that rainmaking? You'd make a fortune if you could do that." "I never even asked," Cully said. "If you'd seen that poor half-drowned critter peering up out of that bookcase, you wouldn't have asked either. I believe in leaving well enough alone, my boy." Just as I glanced up at his sagging ceiling, it gave out a loud creak. Even calm old Sal jumped up, startled like, but Cully didn't blink an eye. "Still, that there's a wonder, isn't it? A wonder of the world." Cully stared up at his bookcase as if he was seeing it for the first time. "Held the secrets of the universe, saved a man's life, and it's holding up my house today." "I wonder," I said. "After all, even the Great Pyramid never held up a man's house." I jotted the story down fast as rain began beating against the windows of the sagging shack. Poor Jeb was hunkered down under a piece of canvas that covered the woodpile when Sal and I finally came outside. "Did you get any chocolates?" he called out. "Something better. A wonder," I shouted back. "Come on, let's run." With Sal in the lead, we raced between the raindrops back down to Yellow Dog Road. "It's a wonder you're still alive," Jeb told me along the way. "You don't know the half of it," I agreed.